The heavy oak door of the bridal chamber clicked shut behind her, with a sound far too final. Elowen Hart stood motionless on the threshold, her ivory wedding gown suddenly feeling like chains of ice against her skin. The room smelled of beeswax candles and white roses. Roses someone had arranged with cruel optimism for a night that was never going to be tender. Thorne Calder, the Duke of Blackthorn, did not turn around at first. He stood with his back to her, one hand resting on the marble mantel, the firelight carving sharp shadows across his broad shoulders. Tall, unyielding, a man carved from winter stone. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, quiet and devastating. "I will never touch you." The words landed like frost on bare skin. "I will never love you." Elowen's breath caught. And most importantly, he paused the silence, stretching until it hurt. "I will never tell you why my first wife died." The air in the room seemed to vanish. She felt the weight of those words press against her ribs, sharp as broken glass. For one terrible second, her knees threatened to buckle. All the fragile hopes she had carried into this marriage, the quiet dream of safety, of belonging, perhaps even of something warmer one day, shattered against the cold floor between them. Yet Elowen Hart did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears were a luxury a woman in her position could not afford. Instead, she lifted her chin, the candlelight catching the determined line of her jaw. "Then, you won't have to worry about my pity either, Your Grace." Her voice came out steadier than she felt, calm, almost gentle. But beneath it lay steel. Thorne turned then. For the first time that night, those dark, storm-gray eyes met hers fully. There was no anger in them, no heat, only a vast, exhausted emptiness. As if he had already buried something precious and was now daring the world to ask why. The silence between them grew heavier, thicker, alive, with everything neither of them was willing to say. Elowen's heart hammered so loudly, she was certain he could hear it. Part of her wanted to flee down the long corridor back to the life she had known before this arranged union. Another part, the stubborn, surviving part, refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her run. She took one slow step forward, the heavy silk of her gown whispering against the floorboards. "You've made your terms very clear," she said softly. "Now let me make mine." Thorne's brow twitched, the smallest flicker of surprise breaking through that frozen mask. "I did not come here expecting your heart," she continued, her gaze never wavering. "But I will not live as a ghost in my own home. I will not be another shadow you refuse to name." She drew in a shaky breath, the scent of roses suddenly cloying. "So here is my vow to you, Duke Calder. I will stay. I will wear your name. I will play the perfect Duchess in public. But do not expect me to disappear quietly into your silence." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The fire crackled. A log shifted, sending sparks dancing upward like tiny dying stars. Thorne studied her face, as though seeing her for the first time. Something unreadable passed behind his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or warning. Then he gave a single, curt nod. "So be it." He turned back toward the fire, dismissing her without another word. Elowen stood there a moment longer, fingers clenched tightly in the folds of her gown. The weight of Blackthorn Manor pressed down on her shoulders, this ancient, brooding house full of secrets and locked doors. Somewhere in the distance, a clock began to strike midnight. She walked to the connecting door that led to her own cold chamber, each step measured, each breath controlled. Only when the door closed behind her did she allow her shoulders to tremble. Only then did she press a hand to her chest and whisper into the darkness, "What kind of man marries a woman and then swears never to tell her why the last one died. 3 months had passed since that wedding night. Yet every corridor in Blackthorn Manor still felt like the same frozen moment. Elowen Hart moved through the great stone house like a woman learning to breathe underwater. The gray walls rose endlessly around her, draped in heavy velvet that swallowed sound. Mist clung to the tall windows, each morning turning the world outside into something distant and unreal. She had tried. God, how she had tried to become the mistress of this place. She chose the menus with quiet care. She spoke gently to the servants. She wore the gowns expected of a duchess. But every night when she climbed the wide staircase alone, the weight of Thorne Calder's silence followed her like a second shadow. He barely looked at her anymore. Their conversations were short-clipped things delivered across the long dining table. Good morning. Pass the salt. Sleep well. Each exchange left another small bruise on her heart. One rainy afternoon, Elowen found young Rowan Calder in the East Gallery. The boy was 14, all long limbs and watchful gray eyes, so like his brothers. He sat cross-legged on the cold floor, charcoal flying across thick paper. When Elowen stepped closer, her stomach tightened. The drawing showed a woman in white. She was falling. Her dress billowed like broken wings as she tumbled from a high balcony into darkness. Rowan looked up startled. His fingers left black smudges on his cheek. I dreamed her again last night, he whispered. She screamed, but no sound came out. Elowen knelt beside him, her silk skirts pooling on the stone. She wanted to pull the paper away to shield him from whatever haunted these walls. Instead, she asked softly, "Who is she, Rowan?" The boy's lips trembled. "My brother's first wife. They say she jumped, but I don't think she did." Before Elowen could answer, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Thorne appeared in the doorway. He stopped when he saw them together. For one brief second, something raw flickered across his face, fear perhaps, or pain too deep to name. Then the mask slid back into place. Rowan. Lessons. The boy gathered his drawings quickly, shooting Elowen one last pleading glance before slipping past his brother. Thorne did not follow him immediately. He stood there tall and rigid, staring at the empty space where the boy had been. "You shouldn't encourage his fantasies," he said, voice low. Elowen rose slowly, heart pounding. "Are they fantasies, Thorne?" He flinched at the sound of his given name on her lips. It was the first time she had used it since the wedding. His jaw tightened. "Do not ask questions you do not want the answers to." He turned to leave, but Elowen's voice stopped him. "I live here too. Every night I walk past that eastern balcony and wonder why the air feels colder there. Every time you look through me, instead of at me, I wonder what ghost I'm competing with." Thorne's shoulders stiffened. He did not turn around. "You married a duke, not a confessor." The words stung like winter wind. Later that evening, Mrs. Whitaker found Elowen in the small sitting room, staring into the fire. The old housekeeper set down a tray of tea with hands that had served 3 generations of Calders. "You look pale, Your Grace," she said gently. The late Duchess. She was pale too toward the end. Elowen's fingers tightened around her cup. "Tell me about her." Mrs. Whitaker hesitated, glancing toward the door. She was kind, fragile, loved roses. But after the accident with the carriage, something in her changed. She started writing in that little blue journal every night. Then one morning, she was gone. The housekeeper's voice dropped to a whisper. "His Grace has not been the same since. He carries it like a chain around his neck." That night, Elowen could not sleep. She slipped downstairs to the library and found the small blue journal hidden behind a row of dusty books, Lavinia Calder's private writings. With trembling hands, she opened it. The last entry was dated the night before the fall. I can't keep pretending. He knows. And if he won't protect me, then I fear what Silas will do next. Silas. The name sent ice down Elowen's spine. 2 days later, Lord Silas Voss arrived unannounced. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He greeted Elowen in the drawing room as though they were old friends. "Ah, the new Duchess. How brave you are, stepping into such tragic shoes." His words dripped with false sweetness. Blackthorn Manor has a way of breaking its women. I do hope you prove stronger than the last one. Elowen felt the old shame rise in her chest, the whispers of her own ruined reputation before this marriage, the way society had once cast her aside. Now she stood here married to a man who would not touch her, living under the shadow of another woman's death, while this man smiled as if he already knew how the story would end. Injustice burned hot behind her eyes. That evening, after Silas had retired to the guest wing, Elowen packed a small valise in her chamber. Her hands shook as she folded a single dress. She could leave tonight. Walk away from this cold marriage, this haunted house, this man who had sworn never to let her in. She was almost at the door when it creaked open. Rowan stood there in his nightshirt, eyes red from crying. "Please don't go," he whispered, voice breaking. "Everyone leaves. Mother, father, her. If you leave too, I'll have no one." The boy's tears undid her completely. Elowen dropped the valisas and pulled him into her arms. She held him while he sobbed against her shoulder, feeling the weight of every secret in this house pressing down on both of them. When Rowan finally fell asleep on her settee, Elowen sat beside him, staring into the darkness. She would not run. Not yet. Instead, she would find the truth. Quietly, carefully. Even if it meant walking straight into the shadows that Thorne Calder had sworn to keep hidden forever. The rain came down in sheets that night, hammering against the tall windows of Blackthorn Manor like angry fists. Elowen Hart could not sleep. She moved through the darkened corridors with only a single candle, its flame trembling in her hand. Something had been pulling at her for weeks, a whisper she could no longer ignore. In the small dressing room off the east wing, she found it. A delicate gold locket half hidden behind a loose panel in the wall. Her fingers shook as she opened it. Inside lay a folded note, the ink faded but still sharp enough to cut. "My dearest, if I do not survive this, know it was not my choice. He watches everything. No signature. Only the faint scent of roses that still clung to the paper after all this time." Elowen's breath caught. She slipped the locket into the pocket of her robe and continued down the hall until she reached the eastern balcony, the place Rowan drew in his nightmares. The wind howled through the open arches. She raised her candle. There on the stone balustrade, barely visible beneath years of weather, was a dark stain. Dried blood. Her stomach twisted. This was not the mark of a woman who had simply jumped. This was violence. The realization hit her like cold water. She stood there, rain soaking through her thin robe, heart pounding so hard it drowned out the storm. The next evening, during the worst of the thunder, she found Thorne in the library. He was standing by the fire, one hand gripping the mantel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Elowen closed the heavy doors behind her. The sound made him turn. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the sharp lines of his face. She did not waste words. "I found the locket," she said quietly. "And the blood on the eastern balcony?" Thorne's entire body went rigid. For a long moment, Only the crackle of the fire and the roar of rain filled the room. He took one step toward her, then stopped. His voice, when it came, was rough, broken. I made a vow. I swore I would never speak of it. Elowen felt the weight of that silence crash down on her chest like stone. She moved closer anyway, close enough to see the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Thorne, whatever happened here, it's poisoning all of us. Rowan wakes screaming. You look at me like I'm already a ghost. How long can you carry this alone? He closed his eyes, his hand curled into a fist at his side. I cannot break that oath, he whispered. Not even for you. The words hurt more than she expected. She wanted to reach for him, to shake him, to demand he stop protecting the past at the cost of their future. Instead, she only nodded once, swallowing the ache in her throat. Then I will find the truth myself. She turned to leave, but Thorne's voice stopped her at the door. Elowen? She glanced back. His eyes were haunted. Stay away from that balcony, please. The quiet plea in his voice lingered long after she left the library. 2 days later, Caspian Vale arrived. Thorne's oldest friend, a quiet, steady doctor with kind eyes and a mind like a steel trap. He and Thorne spoke for hours behind closed doors. When Caspian finally emerged, he found Elowen waiting in the hallway. He's killing himself with this secret, Caspian said softly. And he's killing that boy too. I've told him as much, but some wounds, a man has to choose to open them before they can heal. His words stayed with her. That same afternoon, Silas Voss returned. He did not bother hiding his poison this time. During tea in the drawing room, he leaned back in his chair and smiled that cold, elegant smile. Such a pity, he murmured loud enough for the footman to hear. The new Duchess seems to be having quite an effect on our dear Thorne. They say he's becoming unstable. Some even whisper she may be the reason his first wife met such a tragic end. Elowen's teacup rattled against its saucer. The injustice burned. She, a woman who had already been cast aside by society once, was now being painted as the villain in someone else's nightmare. That night the storm returned. Elowen stepped onto the eastern balcony to clear her head, needing air, needing space from the suffocating silence of the house. The wind whipped at her skirts. She gripped the balustrade tightly. Then she felt it, a sudden violent push from behind. Her body lurched forward. For one terrifying second, the stone railing was the only thing between her and the long drop into darkness. She cried out, scrambling backward with all her strength. Strong hands caught her arms at the last moment and yanked her to safety. She collapsed against a warm chest, gasping. Thorne. He held her so tightly she could barely breathe, his heart hammering against her ear. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Only the rain and their ragged breathing filled the night. When he finally pulled back, his face was pale with fury and fear. Someone pushed you, he said, voice shaking. Elowen looked up at him, rain streaming down her face, tears mixing with the storm. She was trembling, but her voice came out steady. I'm done waiting for you to speak, Thorne. Her hand rose to touch his cheek, wet and cold. Either you tell me the truth, or I walk out of this house tomorrow and never come back. She stepped away from him, leaving him standing alone on the balcony where death had already visited once. As she walked back into the warmth of the manor, Elowen's heart raced with a new terrifying resolve. She would break his silence, even if it cost her everything. Because staying in the dark was no longer an option. Not for her, not for Rowan, and perhaps not even for Thorne. The days after the balcony incident felt like walking on shattered glass. Elowen Hart moved through Blackthorn Manor with a new kind of fire in her veins, quiet, determined, and unafraid. She could no longer wait for Thorne to speak. So she acted. Late one afternoon, while Thorne was out riding, she slipped away to the village and met Caspian Vale in the back room of the old coaching inn. The doctor listened in silence as she described the locket, the bloodstain, and the violent push that had nearly ended her life. Caspian's kind eyes darkened with concern. "I'll help," he said simply, "but you must be careful." Some secrets fight back when cornered. From there, she went straight to Mr. Quentin Ashthorne's trusted solicitor, who had arrived quietly the night before, at her urgent request. In the dim light of his temporary office, Elowen laid out everything she knew. The lawyer adjusted his spectacles, his face grave. "This is no longer a matter of grief, Your Grace. This is murder concealed." That same evening, Elowen found Rowan in his room curled up with his sketchbook. The boy looked smaller than his 14-year eyes, red-rimmed from another sleepless night. She sat on the edge of his bed and took his trembling hands in hers. "Rowan," she whispered, "I need you to be brave for me. Tell me what you saw that night. The night your brother's first wife fell." The boy hesitated, fear flashing across his young face. He was silent for so long she thought he might refuse. Then the words spilled out in a broken rush. "I was hiding behind the curtains, playing a game. I saw Uncle Silas arguing with her on the balcony. She was crying. He grabbed her arms, and then he pushed." Rowan's voice cracked. She screamed my brother's name before she fell. Tears slipped down Elowen's cheeks as she pulled the boy into her arms, holding him while he shook with the memory he had carried alone for too long. The pieces finally fit together into something horrifying. Not suicide. Cold, calculated murder, driven by jealousy and a vicious fight over the Calder inheritance. That night, the snow began to fall. Thick, silent flakes blanketed the world outside, turning Blackthorn Manor into a frozen kingdom. Elowen stood by the window in the small sitting room, watching the snow swirl when the door opened softly behind her. Thorne stepped inside. His coat was dusted with white, his dark hair damp from the storm. He looked exhausted. And something else. Broken open. He crossed the room slowly, stopping only a few feet away. "I almost lost you," he said, voice raw. "On that same balcony." Elowen turned to face him. The candlelight caught the unshed tears in his storm-gray eyes. For the first time since their wedding night, Thorne Calder looked like a man drowning in guilt he could no longer carry. He took a shaky breath. "I swore I would never speak of it. To protect Rowan, to keep the scandal from destroying what was left of this family." His hands clenched at his sides. "But Silas Voss." He pushed her, because she discovered his scheme to steal the inheritance. She threatened to expose him. And I arrived too late. I saw her body on the stones below. Silas stood there calm as death and told me if I spoke a word, he would make sure Rowan met the same fate. Thorne's voice broke completely. "I chose silence to save my brother. But it has been killing me. And now it almost killed you." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and sacred. Snow tapped gently against the window panes. Elowen felt her own walls crack. She stepped forward and reached for him. Thorne hesitated only a second before pulling her into his arms. It was their first real embrace. His body trembled against hers as years of buried pain finally broke free. Elowen held him tightly, one hand stroking the back of his neck, the other pressed against his racing heart. She did not accuse. She did not demand. Instead, she whispered against his chest, "Silence only gave his crime more power, Thorne. But the truth can set us all free." Tears slipped down her cheeks and soaked into his shirt. Thorne buried his face in her hair, holding her as if she were the only solid thing left in his world. For long minutes, they stood like that, two wounded souls, finally allowing themselves to feel the weight they had carried alone. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested gently against hers. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to do this. How to live without the silence." Elowen cupped his face with both hands, her thumbs brushing away the tears on his cheeks. "Then we learn together," she said softly. "One truth at a time." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the dark stains of the past in pure white. Inside, for the first time in years, the heavy silence of Blackthorn Manor felt just a little lighter. But Elowen knew the hardest part was still ahead. They would have to face Silas Voss. They would have to bring the truth into the light. And they would have to do it together, or lose everything. The great hall of Blackthorn Manor glowed with candlelight and the quiet murmur of gathered nobility. It was supposed to be a simple winter gathering. But tonight, everything would change. Thorne Calder stood tall at the head of the long table, Elowen at his side. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, the first time she had touched him openly in front of others. Caspian Vale and Mr. Quentin Ashe stood nearby, their faces calm, but their eyes sharp with purpose. Silas Voss entered the room with his usual confident smile, greeting guests as though he owned the very air he breathed. He did not yet know the trap had already closed. When the room had settled, Thorne spoke, his voice low, but carrying to every corner. "Tonight I break a silence I should have broken years ago." The guests fell quiet. Thorne looked directly at Silas. "My first wife did not take her own life. She was murdered." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Silas's smile faltered for the briefest second. Mr. Quentin Ashe stepped forward, unfolding several official documents with steady hands. "These are medical reports from Dr. Caspian Vale confirming the injuries on the late Duchess's body were inconsistent with a fall caused by suicide. They show clear signs of struggle." Caspian's voice followed, quiet and authoritative. There were bruises on her arms where someone held her before she was pushed. Silas laughed, but the sound was too sharp, too forced. "This is madness. You would accuse me based on old papers and the word of a grieving man." Thorne's gaze never wavered. "No. We accuse you based on the eyewitness account of my brother and the letter your victim wrote the night she died." Elowen lifted the small gold locket from her palm and opened it, revealing the faded note inside. Her voice was clear and steady. "She knew you would come for her. She was trying to protect this family from you." Silas's face drained of color. He took one step back, eyes darting toward the doors. But it was too late. Two constables moved quietly into position behind him. Quentin Ashe continued, his tone measured and final. "Lord Silas Voss, you are hereby charged with the murder of the late Duchess of Blackthorn. The evidence has been sent to London. You will face trial." The room erupted in stunned whispers. Silas lunged forward, his mask of elegance shattering completely. "You have no proof. This is revenge, nothing more." Thorne's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "I kept silent to protect my brother. But silence nearly cost me the woman I love. I will be silent no longer." Silas was led away, still shouting denials that grew fainter as the doors closed behind him. The silence that followed felt different, clean, almost sacred. Later that night, The heavy snow had stopped. Rowan Calder slept peacefully in his bed for the first time in years, no nightmares pulling him awake. Elowen stood alone in the snow-covered garden, breathing in the cold, crisp air. Footsteps crunched softly behind her. She turned. Thorne walked toward her through the white-covered paths, his dark coat dusted with fresh flakes. He stopped a few feet away, then slowly lowered himself to one knee in the snow. Elowen's breath caught. Thorne. He looked up at her storm-gray eyes, no longer shadowed by secrets. On our wedding night, I made a vow of silence. It was born of fear. It nearly destroyed us both. His voice trembled slightly. Tonight I make a new vow. He reached for her hand. She gave it to him without hesitation. I vow never to let fear control me again. I vow to choose truth over protection and love over silence. I want to begin this marriage again, not as an arrangement forced upon us, but as a choice. My heart's choice. Tears slipped down Elowen's cheeks, warm against the winter air. She sank to her knees in the snow so they were face to face. I accept your vow, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. And I give you mine. No more shadows between us. Only light. Only us. Thorne leaned forward and rested his forehead gently against hers. For a long moment they stayed like that, two hearts finally free of the chains they had carried for so long. A small, genuine smile touched Thorne's lips. It transformed his entire face. Elowen smiled back, the first real unguarded smile she had given since stepping into this manor. They rose together, hands still clasped. Inside the warm glow of the drawing room, Rowan waited by the fireplace, a soft blanket around his shoulders. When Thorne and Elowen entered, the boy looked up, eyes bright and hopeful. Thorne crossed the room and pulled his brother into a tight embrace. Elowen joined them, wrapping her arms around both. The three of them stood together beside the crackling fire, a small family no longer haunted by the past. The heavy shadows that had lingered in every corner of Blackthorn Manor finally began to fade. Outside, fresh snow continued to fall, covering the garden in pure, untouched white. Inside, the warmth of the firelight danced across their faces. And for the first time in many long years, the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn felt something they had almost forgotten. They felt home. And that, dear listener, is the quiet power of courage and truth, showing us that silence may shield us for a while. But only honesty and bravery can bring lasting freedom and real happiness. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals narration and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.